Welcome to episode number 19 of You Can't Say That, Social 19 podcast about class culture and other topics. Today is myself, Sam, Joy, and we are also being joined by Brendan, who is our stream team socialist. I don't know how to call you, what to call you, but you're the more progressive person that has conversations with Joy and I quite a bit. And after Tuesday's class, he wanted to join the podcast to give some insight on the more progressive left side of the conversation from yesterday, and most likely myself and maybe Sam, but probably myself, will be giving the more conservative side and just seeing what we thought about Tuesday's class. So how's everybody doing?
Dude, killing it.
Pretty well.
Yeah, killing it.
I liked class this week. I thought it was pretty good. If I say myself.
Yeah, see, it was good. I thought we had two interesting classes. They were interesting to me, so I guess that's all that matters for me, because I only care about myself. So, yeah. Let's talk about Tuesday's class, though, because I want to make sure we have enough time to talk. I want to hear what Brendan has to say, and I hear you had a few ideas.
Yeah.
So,
just to recap Tuesday's class really quick, we talked about teams and tribalism, and so the idea of belonging to specific groups, and we talked a lot about how do people get accustomed to liking a particular team, what makes a person a fanatic, and then we connected those things to politics to ask the question of like, how do people believe in their political beliefs? How do people grow up in political understanding? And how does it connect to the same thing as fanaticism and being a big fan of somebody? You want to take the floor?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I think what I would say is it's one of those ideas of that's really grounded in sociology at so many levels that, like, really interesting, or I think thought-provoking sociology is not the sort of factors and forces of causality, the way in which we're shaped by things around us, but it's about the way we're shaped by things around us that we don't see and nobody sees, that are organizing our lives in ways that we don't understand. And can't really see. That's like the powerful sociology, right? So the classic study of sociology was about suicide with Durkheim, and he was able to demonstrate the ways in which there are these factors, these forces that are influencing people's desire or success at killing themselves, and in ways that they don't really understand. And suicide is really big because nobody would think that suicide is socially structured, right? Suicide is a deeply personal psychological act, and that it goes well beyond, that it's just internal. Like, I make a decision to kill myself. It's not shaped by the demographics of my life. But Durkheim was showing in that study that it was actually shaped by not only a lot of demographics, like male, female, social class, all sorts of things, but it's shaped by even things that we don't even comprehend. And the reason he was able to show that is because the suicide rate remains really stable and steady over time. It doesn't change very much. And so if people are making individual decisions, we would expect the suicide rate to fluctuate a great deal, but it doesn't. And therefore, that's these invisible strengths that are structuring our lives in ways that we don't see, right? So I'll say this, and then I want to hear what Brendan has to say. Hence, with like the idea of political parties, the things are shaping the way people interact with politics, things that they don't really see and don't understand. And I was just talking about this sort of team mentality that happens, that people are actually not thinking about the issues very much at all, rather just feeling this desire and interest to join some kind of a team. Because that's all part of us, right? We all want to be part of teams. Anyway, so bro, what did you hear? What is your?
I think that like I mean I saw that transition coming from sports teams to politics a mile away, and I think that like with the sport teams, like, you know, being born in Philadelphia or, you know, 100 miles to the west, and then all of a sudden your entire life is completely different. You know, your role models based on the teams that you watch and where you're spending your Saturday nights and all this kind of stuff. It's the same thing, but different location, different people you're supporting and all this kind of stuff. I think that's a really, you know, I think that's like the crux of sociology in a sense that, like, you know, everything is kind of relative to our own experience in a way. And I think with that kind of an example, it made sense to kind of say that they're really similar. But with the politics thing, I mean, maybe I'm a little, maybe I've like become, maybe I've I've let the whole team stuff in politics like make me a divisive person in that way. But like, I kind of didn't grasp, I didn't necessarily agree with saying that the Democratic and the Republicans are essentially the same because they don't care about the issues. Because I see like the issues that the issues that people are wanting and the world views that people have from both of those parties as being different. And like even from class, the examples that I saw from class from that were, you know, you had the person who was the Bernie representative up front. You had the Make America Great Again representative up front, and you know they both started from a kind of similar place. You know what I mean? Like the Bernie Sanders supporter was not in the option A of the distribution or whatever, and the Trump supporter did not start from the option D, which would kind of really, I think that would be a point of saying like, oh wow, this is like really different. Like you're over here, you're over here. The fact that they were B and C kind of goes to your point as about, you know, how they are somewhat similar, but some of the like wording and stuff and some of the values that they were talking about seemed starkly different to me. So for example, like the Bernie Sanders supporter right off the bat, he's like, I want guarantees. I want, you know, and when he's talking about guarantees, he's talking about healthcare. He's talking about college education. But on the other end, the Trump supporter, his viewpoint was we need wealth inequality so that you can, you know, be motivated to climb the ladder. And he didn't even end there. He also added so that you can better yourself, which I find interesting because, you know, it's kind of implying that there's like, I don't know if it's within all of the Republican Party or Republicans in general, but I thought it was interesting that he was implying that like material wealth makes an individual better and that people need to be striving for more material wealth to do that. And then, you know, and I think like it's interesting how, you know, I think, and then that's the other thing too, is that like the reason why the Bernie Sanders supporter is more on the side of he wants more equality and the other person, the Trump supporter, was more on the side of less equality. It's interesting because the Trump supporter is saying like you need the inequality to grow, but I think the Bernie supporter would also say, well, you need resources to grow. You can't have the bottom 40% of people having no wealth and expect them to climb the ladder.
Right. Okay, I got you.
And I also, the other interesting, I thought of this after the fact, after I was talking to Jeff yesterday, was that I think you're right in the sense that, you know, I think you're right and wrong about the whole like Democrats and Republicans need to come together for some of these issues. I think there are issues that are bipartisan issues, but I think I think there are times where Democrats compromise to Republicans, like they're like, you know, there's Democratic position and there's the Republican position. And then my view is that as Democrats try and compromise with the Republicans seem to keep running to the right. And that's now like, now we're in a position where the Republicans have run so far to the right, and the Democrats have been kind of like slowly, incrementally chasing them in the name of compromise, that the Democratic Party now is just moderate Republicans. You have Joe Biden up there kind of talking about the status quo. You have a lot of these candidates, they're kind of pushing status quo policies.
Hey, just on that really fast, I agree with you. I think that's really happening. It's a very similar thing happened in the 70s when the Republican Party got really left. And the 70s in the early 80s, actually, and you see it even in the Reagan administration. I didn't see this at the time, but I'm able to see it later, how much even Reagan and George Bush the first moved far to the left to accommodate democratic ideas, because the whole country had shifted that direction. And so the Republican Party moved there. And now they kind of move, and they're doing exactly what you said. Everybody's sort of shifting right. So
I think populist ideas are good in I think populist ideas are popular in politics and stuff. And I wouldn't even stop at Reagan. I would say that a lot of Trump's rhetoric was even populist.
Oh my gosh.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I think it's like fake populism. I think that he was kind of just
yeah,
saying the right things to make people think that things were going to change in the better way. And then, as soon as he's in office, he does the tax code that ends up benefiting the top 1%, all this kind of stuff.
Okay, so let me throw a couple of responses out to what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you're making some really good points. So for me, I'm not thinking that the Democrats and the Republicans need to come together. I'm thinking that they are together in lots of ways, right? Already, this idea, so we've got these teams, right? And the teams seem like they're really far apart, and then that they just sort of really hate each other, kind of thing, right? Well, so it's analogous to professional sports teams, these two groups of players, they come out onto the pitch, like in American football, and they're trying to take each other's heads off. And then after the game, they all come together and they're talking and yucking it up because they know it. So many of them know each other, right? And I'm just like, whoa. And so similar to politics, people aren't that far apart when you sit down and start talking. So those two guys who were sitting at the table, the Bernie supporter and the Trump supporter, you're right. They had some very clear lines of disagreement, but I could have easily just had a conversation with them, and they would have seen pretty easily the ways in which their perspectives could come together. And one guy could give up just a little bit if he just reframed it, and the other guy could give up a little bit if he reframed it, and then suddenly they're basically making a very, very similar argument. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we see. I was in the Senate the U.S. Senate chambers, when there was a vote happening, and I just happened to I was in D.C. to give a talk. And I just stopped by the Capitol, and I said, well, let me go in there. And I was leaving, and one of the pages said, hey, by the way, they're actually going to have a vote in about 20 minutes. And meaning the entire Senate was convening, because there wasn't much going on except people yammering on us. So I stayed. And so I was up in the upper chambers, and I had a front row seat. I was just right like this on the balcony watching the whole thing. And I knew, who so many of these people are, right? And I watched them come in, and I couldn't tell who were the Republicans, who were the Democrats, because they're all just like yucking it up and like doing their thing and talking to each other. And then at some point in time, they do the vote, and the votes just split 50-50, right? And I'm like, wait, y'all are just talking. You're laughing it up and talking to each other and having a good time and whatever. And they come and you vote, and then afterwards, I was reading some of the comments, in the news, in the Washington Post the next day, and I'm looking at the grenades that they're lobbing back and forth, and I'm like, but you were here just chilling out, right? So after this vote, some of you probably went out and had a beer together, right? And I thought, my God, this is a really just immensely complex thing, right? So. I think that's that's that part of the sociology. And so it's not that these political teams are the same, but that people join them for very similar reasons and not because of the ideology, right? They're joining them because of factors and forces in their life.
Well, I think the example of you moving 50 miles or being born 50 miles west and you're supporting a different team, I feel like for me that translating into politics could be for me it's both of my parents were atheists, but who knows if both of my parents had been extremely religious, if I would have been a hardcore conservative. That's the way I kind of see it in terms of my ideology and what team I am in terms of politics being completely arbitrary based on those kind of factors.
I think that's correct because, for instance, I did grow up in a family that wasn't necessarily super religious, and that was why we were conservative. But my parents were very poor, and they were able to. My dad went to school full time and worked part-time jobs, and my mom worked multiple jobs while they had two kids at home, and they were able to, as they say, pull themselves up from their bootstraps, and made a life for themselves where they're financially happy and set right now. And so I grew up with that belief of if you work really hard, you can do whatever you want to. And so I think a lot of the reason why people believe that and the things that they believe in sports and in politics is because of their community and the people around them. I remember I was talking to my cousin, and she's 16 now, and I was talking to her when she was 15 or something, and she said an opinion that she had, and I said, "Oh my God, you're a human being now," and she was like, "Thanks," and I was like, "No, because." Until you get beyond just the belief system of your family, that's when you are an actual person, because you've actually thought these things yourself. And so that's why I said that to her. She didn't really understand, but I thought it was funny. And so I think that it goes hand in hand for a lot of those. And I also believe that in the foundation of a lot of what we believe in a lot of the same things. Of course, not all of the things are the same. People will disagree on abortion until forever. But in terms of the basics of pursuing your own happiness and giving yourself, a successful life and doing the things that you find meaning in your life, I think all of us want to strive for that. And I think that our political parties all want the same thing towards equality, equality towards opportunity, and equality of not outcome, because Republicans are we can't have an equality of outcome, but we can have the opportunities to get you the same place as somebody else. But we have two completely, or many different, because I wouldn't say two, but there are 10 different ways of going about that. And that's where we differ very, very much.
To go along with what you were saying, Sam, about I think I see what you're saying in terms of in terms of the issue of an abortion. This is my example, is I have a really conservative aunt who I talk to abortion about, and I just get her ideas and I throw my ideas out there. And in a way, we both think we were talking about it, and I ended up looking up the statistic, and it was something there were 1 million abortions in the United States every year. So in a way, my aunt, my very conservative aunt, she doesn't want there to be any more abortions. And from my perspective, I'm pro-choice, but I still wish there were no abortions. So I guess we're in a way still both anti-abortion. It's just that we have different ways of going about it, whether or not it's abstinence and whatever, or me saying expanded sexual education and maybe free reproductive contraceptives or condoms and stuff, more
and
that kind of stuff.
And I think that's where what Sam was saying with there needs to be that compromise, or you didn't even say this, but the thought was from Brendan, at least before the podcast, was when you thought Sam was saying that, well, they all should work together or whatever. They should meet in the middle. And that's where the compromise happens. And that's the reason why I'm really nervous about a Bernie Sanders running as the Democratic nominee, because I'm really fearful of him not being able to get both sides to come together. Because listen, Obama promised that we would have, Medicare for all. He didn't say that exactly, but he wanted his Obamacare to be much more than it was, but then he had to water it down just so that it could pass through Congress. And that's why I'm okay, so if we vote for Bernie Sanders, what's going to happen? Okay, he's going to do all of these things executive order wise, which a lot of them I like, but the big ticket things like Medicare for all, it's not going to happen. it's not, especially for the fact that it's going to be a Democratic socialist versus a kind of Republican, or kind of conservative, but mostly just a Republican of Trump, and all of the purple districts, not even the states, but the purple districts are going to turn, I fear, we're going to turn red. And so even like then we'll be dividing our Congress up.
So what's the problem with them turning red?
The problem with them turning red from a Bernie Sanders supporter standpoint is that it'll be harder for him to pass his legislation in Congress. Oh, yeah. Because the big purple states like Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Florida are going to be crucial in this election, but it's really going to come down to the big, like outside of, it's assuming that he wins all of those states, I'm not sure if he's going to win the districts.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's not going to much matter because Trump's going to win anyway, so you don't have to.
And even whoever wins is going to be the same as the person before them and the person before them.
As the talking head said, same as it ever was.
So I'm going to throw out three things here. One thing is that I remembered this part of the lecture was when you said to the Bernie Sanders supporter, you're not in favor of plan A or option A in terms of the distribution. He said, well, I don't want that. And then you had said, well, you're not feeling that much of the burn. And I want to contest that because I'm saying I don't think Bernie Sanders' position is he wants total wealth equality. So I'm just going to say that the first.
He doesn't either, actually. Although, technically, no, he doesn't. So, it's all good.
And then the second thing is I understand what you're saying, Jeff, about the purple districts and stuff. But in my recent looking at polls and stuff, Bernie's leading Trump in all of those states that Hillary Clinton lost in the Midwest. And Trump is like the only candidate. Trump is beating all of the other Democratic candidates in Ohio and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. And it's only Bernie. Polls can change and all this kind of stuff. But as of right now, Bernie Sanders is even beating Trump in those head-to-head polls in those states. And then I don't remember Bernie's quote from this most recent debate, which was an awful debate, and I don't recommend anyone.
It was so funny.
But you said something about like, well, Medicare for all won't get passed, and I think Bernie's quote at the end of the debate, because they asked him one of those like fluffy questions to end the debate of like, what's the misconception about you and what's your favorite quote, and his quote was something about Mandela, about how like you can't achieve the impossible until you try. So like you can't just say like Medicare for all is what we should have, but it'll never get passed, so we shouldn't try. Like I think a majority of Americans support Medicare for all. So if it's the politicians who are not going to represent the people and vote that way, then I don't think Bernie Sanders has a problem. I was telling you about how Bernie Sanders' strategy with Medicare for all is if the majority of Democrats, this is Americans support Medicare for all, but especially Democrats, it's like 70% of Democrats support Medicare for all this at this point in time, even when they phrase the poll questions from like a weird standpoint. Like they don't just say, do you support Medicare for all? They say like, do you support eliminating private insurance in favor of a single payer system? And like, even when they phrase it like that, people are like, yes. But Bernie's strategy with that is like, well, if the majority of Democrats support Medicare for all and you're a Democrat and you're not going to vote for Medicare for all, I'm going to go to your state and I'm going to essentially embarrass you and say like, you're not representing your constituents, and doing that like actual those are like, that's actual, like that's the politics stuff, is when you're actually you're putting political pressure on people. But I'm curious what Sam thinks about any of this.
It's so funny, man, how much I don't think about politics at all. I don't think about these questions, even from a sociological perspective. That one might imagine, hey, Jeff, tell Joy to just blacken her screen, blacken her camera.
I got it.
All right. So, so I think I meant Joy. My bad. I'm just surprised at how much I don't think about political questions. I don't know why. I find it kind of interesting. I watched that debate the other night for about 10 minutes. I was over at the house of a friend, and I got about 10 minutes in. It was, wow, it was crazy.
Yeah.
Um, I wouldn't even call it a debate. It was just a clown.
Yeah,
It was an Insane Clown Posse remix. And do you guys know who they are? The Insane Clown Posse?
Yeah. Great makeup.
So, yeah, I don't. It's just one of these things. It's just about power, man. It's so much about power.
Yeah. The thing. So I'm curious what you think about this. So I'm of the belief that the debates really shouldn't even take place in front of an audience.
Yeah.
Because I think like when you have all of these like laughing, like you have these applause lines and you have these like built-in jokes and stuff like that. I think Vox or something, they did a video where they like eliminated the laughter from the Trump Hillary Clinton debates, and it just sounds awkward. So it's like when you eliminate that like crowd pleasing aspect of it, it again like it forces you to focus on the policy. But like you were saying, maybe most people don't care about the policy. They do really just care about the one-liners.
Yeah, no, I think they care about the laughter and the applause and that sort of stuff. So it's a game.
I think in the future we should change from different networks hosting the debates to having a third-party moderate production company to do it, and like the moderators to not be from CNN or MSNBC or Fox News, but from them being from some organization, and for it to all be available online, because screw MSNBC and CNN and CBS for not allowing for people to be able to, for the cable cord cutters of America to not be able to access these.
Dude,
like what?
You're missing the entire purpose of it. The entire purpose is to reproduce power in America. And so any of these suggestions that y'all are putting out there would undermine business as usual. And that's what this is about, especially the political parties. So this is an industry, right? The Democrats and Republicans in elections and so on and so forth, political parties, this is a massive, many hundreds, billion-dollar industry. So all of the consultants and all of the polling and the advertisements and everything around it, everything. It's a massive industry, and that's what they represent. And there are so many human beings that are employed in this industry and that are part of it. And to stop that, it's kind of like stopping the military industrial complex. So the party power is really being held together by, it's like, this is a sociological thing, like system reproduction. So every time they draw on this, the structure of whatever it is, right? The rules and the resources in this one way of looking at it. But as they draw on the structure, they reproduce the structure. So
yeah, I just was going to mention some of the like awful, like just how, first of all, I just want to say that you're right about like all of these industries that have power, and also that like they're profiting so much from that power, and they will do whatever it takes to keep that power. And they will.
Well, hang on though. Let me just, before you go on, let me just say one thing really fast. It's not just that they're profiting, it's just that they're employing human beings. And so it's just like Medicare for all. The key to making the profit with Medicare for all is getting rid of all of the intermediary insurance people, right? That you don't really need so much of that. This is just such a massive industry. So if you could just get rid of that, you could, and invest that money in other places, that's how you can bring healthcare to so many more people. But all those people, what are they going to do, right? Like, what are they going to do? So same with the whole politics in the United States. It's like when you have so many many tens and hundreds even of thousands during campaigns employed in this arena, what are you going to do, right? So that's kind of,
if we could change subjects a little bit, just because we're about half hour in, we don't have too much time today. Last week we talked about Cuba, and we talked about just the connections that Bernie was making, and then after the podcast, Bernie really got into some crap for what he was saying, and pretty much the people who are more on the right or more moderate or having an issue with Bernie talking about the praises of socialism and communism. For instance, Cuba having a 99.7% literacy rate and a 1.7% unemployment rate. And then they would...
That's exaggerated, the unemployment rate, but go ahead.
Well, so what, 5%? Like, they have but the point is they have a pretty good unemployment rate. And Bernie was saying these good things, and then, of course, Anderson Cooper was like, well, what about all of the negative things that happened? He was like, well, of course we don't agree with that. And a lot of the Republicans have been just destroying and throwing crap at China and Cuba and all of these places, when in fact they don't even look at our own country and realize that we've done much worse than what they have done. So, for instance, they're like, well, Fidel Castro put hundreds of or maybe thousands of people in jail and killed them. And it's like, okay, and why aren't we talking about the fact that America killed 130 million Native Americans? Mm-hmm. Like, why don't we ever talk about the negative things, but we only ever talk about the positive things that come?
Yeah. Listen, man. Yeah, but I want to say not 130 million indigenous peoples, by the way. So I don't want to leave that out there. But nonetheless,
that's the best number that I can find. There were well over.
That's exaggerated. That's just from.
Okay, so what do you think the average? What do you think the number would be? How many millions of people did we kill compared to Fidel Castro and the fact that he put maybe 1,000, 2,000, 10,000? Hell, let's go with 100,000 people in jail and killed them because they disagreed. And I'm not saying that that's the best possible policy and stuff.
It's 100% unequal. I mean, it's not even a question. Cuba is a very small island, very small population. It is just your point is nonetheless taken. It's a good point. Like, people aren't looking at those kinds of things, right? They're just not. People here aren't looking at those kinds of things. So it's like the reaction against Cuba was just the problem is the reaction against Cuba was Cuba represented an ideal that people on the left were able to bond around, starting in the early 60s, right? And so it gave people this sense of what is possible, people in poor countries all throughout Latin America, and it gave a lot of energy to an alternative to capitalism, which for most countries in Latin America in the early 60s, capitalism represented repression, militaristic governments who were very repressive, and and systems that were extremely unequal. And so Cuba represented an alternative to that. It didn't matter that it was communist or socialist or whatever. That was completely irrelevant. That's just rhetoric. It's just that, hey, this is possible. Yeah. And so we had to shut that down, because you can't have poor people in Latin America thinking that they don't have to be poor, because we want access to all those resources there. And so, like, that's just part of the package. So yeah, so you're right in the sense that and so we developed this rhetoric against Cuba that was just so out of balance with what was actually happening, that if we'd have just even looked at any pieces of just Native Americans in the United States. Now, forget about all the indigenous peoples who were killed over the past who had been killed in the previous 500 years, but just indigenous people in the United States. Anybody with a reasonable mind would say, whoa, why are we focusing on Fidel Castro and Cuba? That we got these other issues that are just very troubling and problematic. So.
A comment was from Ravioli. He said, what I'm saying is because Ted Bundy killed 30 people that he is allowed to kill one. No, my point is the fact that we put ourselves over this moral hierarchy of we can't do anything wrong because we don't look at what we've done wrong. And then we look at these other countries and it's like, it doesn't matter what good they did for their people because they went about it in a way that we disagree with. It's like, okay, so maybe there isn't one correct answer to run a country or one correct society. Maybe there's multiple different ways to get the same types of things done, of equality, of the happiness of your citizens. And maybe even the best of us screw up big time.
Yeah.
And we need to acknowledge both sides for all sides. Not that it excuses or justifies one or the other, but we have to look at both sides of both societies.
What's interesting is I think in a way, like whatever is happening at the highest level of the government, I feel like there's two ways of like distracting the public from what is happening there, because like you were saying, like while there was improved literacy and increases in life expectancy because they implemented like a health service in Cuba, they were they were just happy with that, or they were distracted by those kinds of things. Meanwhile, the like authoritarian kind of stuff was happening on the sidelines and they kind of ignored it. So it's kind of interesting how you can kind of get the public to ignore the stuff either by giving them social amenities and social resources, or I would say the other end of the spectrum is the whole divisive, pit everyone against each other xenophobia route.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
But it's interesting that I'm going to tie some of the stuff I was going to say earlier was that when Bernie got asked that question about, his comments about Cuba, and he did say they did increase literacy, they did increase their life expectancy to the same level as the United States, despite being a tiny, poor country at the time. And then he did say the rest of the stuff was awful. But he got booed for saying that by the people who were able to afford the tickets that cost $1,700 to $3,200 to go to the debate.
Exactly. It's just
the question was asked and framed by moderators who make millions of dollars.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was framed from and then the other thing was that, in between commercial breaks, they're running commercials for Bloomberg, who's one of the people up on the stage.
Dude, it's pathetic, actually. It's pathetic that nobody just has any idea what happened in Cuba, right? So, the reason I got named as one of the 101 most dangerous professors in America is this guy, David Horowitz, was doing an interview. And he used to be a left-winger and he turned to the right. And he was doing this interview and he was talking about Cuba and just saying the similar kinds of things, man, just demagoguery, right? And so I called in and I said, this is, it's full of shit, man. Like this, you have no idea what actually happened there, right? Like, and I'm not a leftist, like hardcore leftist. I'm a sociologist, so I like to look at the facts, right? So let's just look at actually what went on. And you can't, first off, Fidel Castro and a communist ideology would never have even emerged in Cuba if there had been even a modicum of equality, right? But there wasn't. And so, of course, people are going to be unhappy. They're going to turn to it. Just like right now, Trump, if the white working class in particular, right, who was not so disenfranchised in the United States, alienated, and the entire economy had been transformed in the past 30 years in a way that really undermined their fundamental interests, right? We would never see Trump today. Mm-hmm. If we actually supported an educated populace of people who are really thoughtful and thinking beings and so on, we would never see Trump or any of the Democratic candidates that are there. We would demand thoughtful people. And except these knuckleheads saying really stupid things. Like, you listen to what Trump says about this coronavirus. This guy has no idea what's going on. I mean, he has no idea. Just make stuff up as he goes along. We just would never have it. White Americans, any Americans, just would never support that, nor would we support the hypocrisy of the Democrats who claim to be supporting the working Americans and the poor and so on, and are absolutely not. And so, yeah.
I think the biggest hypocrisy, to me, the biggest hypocrisy in the Democratic Party right now is the whole viewpoint of, the Democrats being coastal educated elites and stuff. And then when it comes to our political process for the Democratic Party, it comes down to superdelegates.
Yeah.
They have the ultimate say. It's just, oh yeah, I went to college and then I was a politician and now I get to decide. My vote counts as a whole vote, a whole delegate vote.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really it's a system to keep certain people in power. I mean, that's the nature. It's always been that way in the United States. The early politicians did not, they were representing a very tiny fraction of the US population. Everything that existed was for them to keep power. Like, why wouldn't it be? You're not going to be, you're these landowning aristocrats, educated aristocrats. That's who all these folks were, who, were convening in Philadelphia, 40 years ago. And they're looking out for the best. They're looking out for the country, and they're going to turn the country over into the hands of an uneducated immigrant population, people who are just incapable of really coming together and governing by anything other than some kind of mob rule. I mean, it's just not going to happen. Forget about slavery. I mean, of course, they didn't know what to do with slaves, and so many of them were slave owners.
Well, they definitely didn't teach them to read. You know what I mean? Like, they didn't even give them that level of education.
Yeah, exactly. And knowing that the entire country was based on slavery, and so if slavery isn't thriving, like cotton and so on, if slavery isn't thriving, the whole country goes down the tubes, right? So you got to keep that. You got to keep everything going, and you got to keep themselves in power. I can give up power.
Yeah.
It'd be like me walking into my class and saying, "All right, listen, man, I'm done now. Why don't you take over?" And then you can also have my salary and have everything else, just like whatever. I'll just go fend for myself. It's like, I'm not doing that. So nobody does that. So that's when we don't study these things, and we have this really unrealistic assessment of what the quote founding fathers were really about. I mean, they wrote this amazing document. I mean, honestly, it's amazing that they could write all these grandiose, lovely things about freedom and human beings, and have nothing to do with that. They're right about people, and then forget conveniently about Native Americans and slaves. Like, that's amazing in and of itself. But they also were really brilliant thinkers about freedom and individualism and society. I mean, they really did a pretty fundamental job for the aristocrats that they were.
True.
Right. So the two things go hand in hand, man. Joy, what did you watch class this week?
I did watch class. Can I tell you about it? No.
All right.
I thought Muhammad was interesting and like where the direction he was trying to go. And you kept being like, okay, no. For like selecting which chart would you think would best represent this, that, and the third, and what wealth was, and him changing the direction and defining. Well, it was like, okay, well, it depends on what we think the wealth is, or what it is that we're talking about. But I thought that was interesting. That was a first for me, anyways. I don't know if you ever had a student try to do that before. With that,
I find it interesting too about in terms of like the choices and stuff, about how I was saying like Republicans run to the right and Democrats are constantly trying to compromise and like be like making peace or whatever. So then it's like Mohammed, when you give him his second option, he moves to C. And when you give the Trump person their second option, he says D is their second best option. So like they both move to the.
I do think there was a perspective given that definitely wasn't thought before, which probably wasn't been the point. but because we're lost in the concept of like teams, and well, if I'm for this, then I'm against you, just like innately. Um, but the what you were saying about how it's all really like if you really just step back and listen and like kind of take your biases away and not be dismissive because they're the other team, you're really kind of just saying or asking for you want the same things. Um, and then I think there was something you did illustrating just the shifts in both parties and how they're both kind of extreme in their own right, compared to views from years ago and just the way that they've kind of evolved.
Yeah, for sure, man. Even just a few, this is the team idea. Like sports, whether it's any sports, they're bigger franchises today than ever before. It is just unbelievable. This wasn't the case when I was growing up, man. Like, oh my God. And so the same with politics. It just was not the case. You had your it was at the conventions and so on, everybody's waving flags and their banners and so on. But yeah, it's just different, man.
Another thing
more grandiose.
Something else I thought was interesting was in terms of like the comparisons between the team and the politics stuff was how, and this was close to home for me because I'm a Patriots fan, but how the Eagles and the Steelers people were like, oh yeah, well, I'll root for the other team if they're playing the Patriots.
Yeah.
And I find that similar to, I think it was Chris Matthews or someone on MSNBC said something along the lines of like, oh, well, like maybe we'll have to support Trump so until we wait for a Democratic candidate that we like. So like you have the moderate Democrats and that's your team, and then you have the progressive Democrats, but at the end of the day, you're so anti the progressive Democrats that you'll support Trump.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I know, that's so crazy, right? But whatever. Everyone's just getting paid to say something that keeps people on their toes.
Mm-hmm.
So,
can I switch again?
Yeah, go ahead, man. I only have about 5 minutes. I'm gonna have to go because I got to get to the airport.
No, you don't. We have another thing to record after this.
Dude, we're gonna have to do it.
Yeah, I thought you said you were coming to just snag Rory at 2:00 and dip.
Let me see. Well, maybe we can do it tomorrow.
Anyway, I wanted to say hi to my dad because my dad has been listening to a few podcast episodes.
Awesome.
Hey, Dad.
What's up, Dad?
And he had a bit of an issue with something that we said in episode 16 where we talked about charity, and how some people give to charity that are connected to religion, and then some people don't connected to religion or not. And my dad's main issue is, or his main opinion, which I think is true for most conservatives, especially when talking about something like universal health care, or Medicare for all, is that the question is how much, or should we demand people to give their money to others through taxes, or should it be out of the goodness of our hearts? And how much should the government be able to regulate that? And the question, or the thing that I would propose to that is talking about something like we talked about abortion earlier with pro-choice. A lot of the people who are pro-life say, I shouldn't be giving my money to fund abortions. Now, of course, that's not true, but that's the idea behind it, is like I shouldn't be forced to give people money to pay for their medical bills because they have pre-existing conditions, or because they screwed up when they were younger and led to this, or they had an accident. Why am I fronted the bill? And
right.
Then this goes to then a question of STDs and HIV. Is it better to invest in prevention or deal with the repercussions of it allowing, which is what the Reagan administration had to deal with during the 1980s, because the Reagan administration, for the most part, completely ignored the fact that the HIV epidemic was happening, and they didn't put any money into talking about safe sex or not sharing needles or whatever the case is that transmits the virus. But they decided just to not do anything, which then made us pay millions of dollars in trying to find a cure rather than trying to prevent it. And I'd also like to point out for my final thing is that Mike Pence is the person that's now in charge of the coronavirus response for the United States. And this is the same guy who failed to realize the fact, or ignored the fact, that in Indiana during, I think it was like 2013 or 2015, there were 30 people that were diagnosed with HIV because they were sharing needles for a painkiller. And that number then skyrocketed to 79 people when he refused to give out needles through taxes, through the public, to allow people to not share these needles anymore. And then after it hit 79 people, he decided, actually, it's probably a good idea for us to do that. So that's the question. That's especially with it's coming from paying for other people's stuff, or this welfare state that people on the right believe that Bernie Sanders wants to invoke on the American people, is how much is it coming from us, the people, and how much is it being taken from us and given to others? Because I've worked hard for my $200,000 in the bank, hypothetically. Let's just say that's a number that's good, but isn't a million, right? And it's not even $250,000. What, Joy?
All right, listen.
Is the concern the government taking money out of directly out of our banks to pay a bill directly, or just a distribution of taxes, which is what we already do for anything, paved roads, schools?
But
what's the problem?
There's a difference when it comes to somebody's personal medical life versus something like roads that we all use. If it's a public good that we all use, it's much easier to remember that, oh, it's a public service, so therefore we can use it. But it's
what about food stamps today?
Food stamps is another reason why Republicans don't like Medicare. They don't like Medicaid. They don't like any of these things in which you have to. They didn't like Social Security when it came out because you have to buy into a system in which anybody can pull from. And why is it my responsibility to pay higher taxes or whatever for you to be able to benefit from it? That's the thing that most conservatives believe in terms of I don't want to say the socialism of it all, but that's the only thing that's popping into my head.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Here, let me just say a quick thing, and then I'm going to really have to go. You guys can keep going if you want, but I think the issue is
people are selfish.
No. Everybody wants to spend their money in ways that make sense to them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And we certainly want to have the option to say no about things that we really, really, really disagree with. Okay. I mean, that's just kind of a given. I think that's got to be universal. So that's on one hand. On the other hand, you have to have a government, right? You just do. You need to have, there's certain things that will not get done unless people pool their money and someone just does them, right? So I always give the example of like shoveling snow. We have these interstates highway system that everybody uses, and if you don't pool your money together, you're not gonna get the snow shoveled, man. This is not an individual thing. Individuals aren't gonna show up there with their snow shovels and get it all taken care of. So you pool your money, everybody collectively decides, hey, we're gonna all contribute X amount, we're gonna have this group of people go shovel it, right? Whether it's a private company or a government, it doesn't matter, it's still taxation. So people say, well, I'd rather have a private company shoveling this. Okay, well, it's still a tax. You don't have to call it a tax, but that's what it is, right?
Well, I'm glad that you said that. I want to before you go, I just wanted to say how that's like for Medicare for all, like the way that I have now learned to frame it is in the way that like you can either pay a public tax and then you have the ability to be in this Medicare for all universal system, or you're going to be paying a private tax and you're going to have to be paying the insurance industry, and then you're going to get a plan that potentially doesn't cover stuff. And
you're going to pay it one way or the other. Look, nobody in the United States, I think Americans don't realize this. Hospitals write off so many bills where people are going, like, if you don't have insurance, I know, like, we're just paying for it one way or the other. We are paying for it. So it's like, look, do you want to just do it up front? But people have the idea that, like, look, I watch people who are really unhealthy. They eat unhealthy foods. They don't take care of themselves. They do really unhealthy things. then they go around and they ride their motorcycle without a helmet on. And I'm like, listen, man, I don't want to pay for your accident and your brain damage and you're in a hospital for 9 months. Like, I don't want to pay for that because you decided you wanted to not ride with a helmet. And so, like, that's me. I put my foot down right there. Like, I demand helmet laws, and that's just how it is. And I'm like, but whatever, I'm gonna have to compromise. So okay, whatever. But
I think the weird thing about like being so obsessed about like I don't want my money going towards that is like what fraction of a percent of your federal taxes are going towards the people in the military being able to get those transgender surgeries or
or their Viagra.
I think in the past 10 years, I paid 2 cents toward veterans, people in the military getting, having surgery, right? So it's not very much.
And yet when we bring up the military spending, crickets, you know what I mean? So,
Sam, for the final thing. Yesterday in class, we talked about Brazil, and people were able to donate if they want to for advancements of to give them books, right? And did you?
All right, let me see you some money.
Right, and did you want to release the number that the students were able to bring in? And if you are interested in donating, send a Venmo to @IUnlearn. Just if you're interested. No one's pressuring you. Just
almost $1,300.
I'm pressuring.
Pretty intense.
So that's friggin' awesome.
Yeah, for money loose, so it's pretty cool.
Yep. All right, Sam, get out of here.
Have a good trip.
Right.
Safe trip.
All right, hey Jeff, can you track Lori when somebody leaves the office?
Yep.
Someone follow her. All right, thanks y'all. Thanks Brandon for
no problem.
Jumping on, and Joy, hasta luego.
Thanks for having me.
See y'all.
Yeah, thanks, man. I like how you think about politics and stuff. You guys both, Jeff and Brendan, political animals. Joy, you're not really a political, although you think about it, but you're not like, you don't get lost in it.
It's in one ear.
Good
opinion out the next.
All right, man.
For now.
All right, I'll talk to y'all.
See ya.
So the next things I had on the list to talk about was about Thursday's class, and I'm gonna fix the cameras in a second to everybody watching. And I think a lot of it I would want to have Sam in the conversation for, so I'm not sure if we can get to it. But just going to my other topics that I had. South Carolina votes on Saturday, and then Tuesday is Super Tuesday. So the next time that we will have a podcast, we should know who is and is not going to be running anymore, because I expect people will drop out. Who do you think is going to stay, and who do you think is going to go after Super Tuesday?
You asking me?
I am.
I think Joe Biden is going to end up winning South Carolina despite his just enormous amount of gaffes that are related to race. Just most recently, he lied about being arrested in an attempt to go see Nelson Mandela. It's just a straight lie. So I think he'll win South Carolina. So I think because he'll win that, he'll stay in the race. It's really hard for me to, I think Elizabeth Warren is kind of defiant at this point, and she's going to stay in the race. I think Bloomberg is on a mission to stay in the race to hurt Bernie Sanders. I think Pete Buttigieg, because of his performance in Iowa and New Hampshire, despite not winning either of the states, I think he did well enough in those states that despite, those 2 days of elections, I think he'll still stay around. And then I think Amy Klobuchar is probably my favorite moderate at this point of all the moderates. So I'd say I think she probably will stay around too, because I think she'll end up doing well. So I don't think anyone's going to drop out. Maybe Tom Steyer, if you forgot that he was in it, I think he might drop out.
He's actually the one I think I agree with the most. I think it depends on how Saturday and Tuesday go. If Biden doesn't have over, because right now I think the numbers is 20% or 20 points over. If he doesn't have a margin that big, it's going to be really hard for him to stay. And if he loses on Super Tuesday badly, I think he's going to be out. If he wins South Carolina, substantially, I think he'll stay in and be that. I think him and Bloomberg. I think Bloomberg, regardless of how he does, is going to stay in the race. He has the money. He's just going to do it. I think Warren, if Warren gets under 1% for either or for Saturday and on Tuesday, I think anybody who, let me rephrase, anyone who's under 10% should and probably will drop out. And I think that's going to include Amy and Warren, and probably Steyer. If Steyer has quite a bit of publicity in South Carolina, so he has a good shot of getting second or third, probably third or fourth, actually. But yeah,
I really like Tom Steyer. It's just the thing that came out of left field. I don't know if you watched the whole debate, but did you hear the thing that just came out of left field about him like investing in private prisons?
He invested in the private prisons, and then where he took stock in the company that owned the private prisons, and then when he found out about the private prisons, he like backed out or something. But that's his words versus another person's words.
Yeah.
He definitely doesn't agree with it, but and then the last thing I want to bring up before we do our final thoughts, because Joy has a meeting and I have to eat lunch, is with the economy. It might be smart to get invested in the stock market right now because of the coronavirus, and I had, yeah. Don't what?
Don't let the people know.
Well, that's how stocks will be able to start to inflate, is if right now we start paying money now into it because it's so cheap.
Japan.
What about Japan?
Japan has given their citizens $1,200 to stimulate their economy since whatever halt has happened with them.
Oh, interesting.
Due to the coronavirus.
So
Every citizen.
But yeah, Jeff said this at the end of class on Tuesday, and just since the stuff is coming up this week, if you're registered to vote, doesn't matter who you're voting for, go out and vote.
And I know if you live in Pennsylvania, I think the deadline is beginning of April, and then the primary here is April. I don't know about the other states. If you need to look up your state, Google search registration for voting or whatever. Yeah, and if you don't know, you have to register for a party to vote for a party in the primary. You do not need to vote for that party in the general election. So if you're a Republican, you have to vote for a Republican, so Trump most likely. And if you're a Democrat, you got to register for a Democrat and vote for one of those in the primary.
Some of them are open primaries, so you need to look into the states. But
yep.
Yeah, for the most part, you do have to be registered as that party.
All right, Brennan got kicked out of his room. Joy has a meeting. I have lunch. Sam has a flight. So we're not going to do final thoughts this week. Freaky Friday. That's exactly right. So we will see you all. Probably, I don't know if we'll see you next Friday, but we'll see you on Tuesday for the next Social 19 live stream. See you, everybody.